The kick's power comes from the torque generated by the rotation of the hips. It's the same principle that cracks a whip. Turning the hips just a few degrees forces the foot to travel a much greater distance and creates a lot of speed as it does. The longer the leg and quicker the rotation, the faster the kick. And unlike karate, Muay Thai fighters are also taught to strike with the hard bone of the shin. A Muay Thai kick can generate roughly the same force as a baseball bat, enough to crack a rib.
It works like a point of a knife. All the force is magnified by being concentrated in a small, hard area. Even if the elbow doesn't deliver a knockout, it will almost always leave a nasty cut, and often getting in close neutralizes the opponent's weapon advantage. Then, in the clinch, we bring the power of the knee to bear. Unlike the kick, which relies on rotation to create power, the knee gets its power from leverage. Pulling our opponent down as we drive the knee up can deliver up to 2.5 tons of force, enough to lift a car. It's not the arms, but the legs that drive this. Like a piston, the explosive power of the legs is capable of generating hundreds of pounds of force, all to a very vulnerable area, the soft underside of the opponent's jaw. Like the Hanuman move, the flying knee relies on the explosive power of the legs. But rather than spread the power of our blow over two fists, it concentrates it into the spear point of the knee and combines it with the force of gravity. It's the equivalent of hitting our opponent in the chest with a sledgehammer.
It works on a concept called the couple. Basically, it's two levers linked at a single fulcrum, the elbow lock. And it doubles the foot-pounds of torque you can generate when compared to a single-arm lock. There's more than enough force to flip an opponent to the mat or dislocate his elbow.
Using the twisting motion of the torso to drive the strike, the business end of the hardwood fighting stick can quickly accelerate to more than 25 miles per hour. On contact with the skull, the energy is enough to cause a depressed fracture. It's the same injury-producing force as being hit in the temple by a hammer. Mali relies on something called a flexion moment imparted to the neck to do damage. An average man's neck can withstand about a 140 foot-pound flexion moment. Beyond that, soft tissue and even vertebrae can be crushed. By bringing your weight down fast, this move could easily deliver twice that amount of force. And it wouldn't just end a fight. It could leave your opponent paralyzed or dead.
Close, the opponent's neck is exposed. But because of the close range, the hand doesn't generate a huge amount of force. It's enough to stun, but probably not enough to cause severe injury. But replace the hand with a weapon, a stick or a knife, as you would in combat, and this could become a kill shot.
The kick's power comes from the snap of the knee. The snap is created when the quadricep, the largest muscle in the body, contracts and pulls the tendon connecting to the foot over the knee. Using the knee as a pulley, the strength of the quad is enough to accelerate your foot to speeds close to 30 miles per hour.
Because the area of impact is focused on a small part of the foot, it magnifies the force of the blow, making it capable of dropping 1,000 pounds of force on your head. It's like getting whacked in the head with a Louisville Slugger.
Works by taking the opponent's blow at an angle, which deflects the energy of the blow away from the vulnerable torso. The harder you block, the further his blow will be deflected, and the more open he'll be to a counter strike.
Rotating your fist 180 degrees right before it strikes the intended target. The twisting snap of the arm maximizes the speed of the punch and magnifies the force of the blow by concentrating the impact on the first two knuckles of your hand. Done correctly, it can deliver as much energy as a bowling ball dropped from the top of a house, more than enough to cause soft tissue damage or break a rib.
Because it swings through such a wide arc, the wrist is moving at speeds of up to 43 miles per hour. And since the radius doesn't deflect or compress nearly as much as a fist, it can deliver a staggering blow, like being hit with an axe hammer.
This roundhouse kick is designed for maximum impact. With the powerful muscles of the thigh yanking the tendon over the knee, the foot accelerates from 0 to 21 miles per hour in just 1/3 of a second. Combine that with the reinforced shoe, and this kick can drive the nose bone back up into the brain. It's aimed at the largest gland in the human body, the liver. A direct hit won't just bring an opponent down. It can rupture the gland, causing severe internal bleeding. But the liver is well protected by the rib cage. so the kick must be accurate to within half an inch. In this move, the forward propulsion of the hips, combined with the piston motion of the lower leg, can send well over 700 pounds of force directly through the rigid bone of the heel.
This impact won't just knock an opponent down. The force is enough to permanently damage his kneecap, leading with the near arm. The first jab travels the shortest distance to the opponent, so what it lacks in force, it makes up for in speed. The second punch, utilizing both the twist of the shoulders and the forward momentum of the kick, can carry over 4 times as much impact. And just a few hundred pounds of force to the temple is enough to cause a knockout.
This move uses the same principle as a throw in judo, off-balancing your opponent and then using his momentum to send him down. But it's much more aggressive. The sweep here is actually a strike to one of the most sensitive areas of the body, the Achilles tendon. The Achilles tendon.
The throw works just like a crowbar, where your leg is the lever and your hip is the fulcrum. The trick is positioning your body in just the right place. If you're just an inch off the placement of your thigh and hip, the amount of energy needed to throw an opponent can more than double. But performed correctly, Uchimata requires almost no energy, yet it can deliver up to 5,000 pounds of force. If it weren't for the mat, a throw like Uchimata would be enough to cause serious injury or even paralysis.
You use the strength of your legs to maintain your dominant position while you secure the choke. Just a few pounds of pressure on the collar of his gi is enough to reduce the blood flow to the brain to a trickle and end the match. Hold this move for 10 seconds and the fighter will black out. Hold it just a bit longer and he's dead.
By bending the elbow across the fulcrum of your hips, you're subjecting the weak joint to the leverage of 2 strong forces: the pull of your thighs on his shoulder and your hands on his wrists. As little as 1,000 pounds of force can be enough to destroy the elbow. The leverage of the armbar can supply much more than that. The sacrifice throw is a simple lesson in conservation of energy. The stronger the opponent attacks, the further he gets thrown. It works like a catapult, where your opponent's momentum supplies the counterweight. The faster he's going, the further he's going to fly. And the harder he's going to land. That land with the side, ball, or top of the foot. The Gastrizin uses the heel to deliver the blow. This alignment of the heel, ankle, lower leg complex channels some 2,000 pounds of force into the opponent. More than enough to break a baseball bat.
The higher you can lift your opponent in this move, the faster he'll hit the ground. It's not just your force working against him. His acceleration due to gravity can mean his head hits the ground with a 3,500-pound impact. On a hard surface like concrete, this is more than enough to cause a serious brain injury.
First, the opponent's arm works as a lever to optimize your control. Second, your own back serves as a pivot point for the throw. The strength and stability of your back allows you to throw a much heavier opponent than in a move that requires you to lift him. This move uses your opponent's arm as a lever working against him. The greater the torque on his shoulder, the greater the pain inflicted. And exceeding the joint's normal range of motion causes more than just pain. The soft tissue, muscles, and the bone can all be seriously damaged by this pressure.
The goal of this lock is to stretch the tendons at the top of the foot to the breaking point. The strongest tendons have a tensile force threshold of just over 400 pounds. Applying any more pressure than that can tear the tendons from their base or snap them in two.
Because you don't have time to cock your arm in a surprise attack, bursting's effectiveness doesn't come from the rotational power of the torso. Instead, it's driven by the legs, which hurl you forward into your opponent. Both the block and the strike land with 300 pounds of force, more than enough to collapse the windpipe or fracture the delicate bones of the face. Doing the 360 defense requires you keep your body in motion at all times, using your arms to defend different angles of attack. The key is keeping your arms at an oblique angle with your hands open and straight so that you don't take any blows straight on. Each is deflected down the angle of your forearm, which reduces its impact.
Your opponent is relying on his grip strength and outstretched arms to maintain the choke. The strength of your back and shoulder muscles is greater than the applied force of your opponent's hold, so it doesn't take much to break his grip.
And the closer your hands are to your own neck, the greater the leverage. The disarm is basically a judo wrist lock and uses many of the same principles. By pulling your attacker forward as you turn, he loses his balance, giving you control of his wrist. The barrel of the gun then becomes a lever, allowing you to take the gun. Because you are using the muscles of your torso, which can deliver up to 10 times more force than the muscles of the wrist, the disarm works against an opponent who is much stronger than you.
Actually an elbow strike from another martial art, Muay Thai. But because the metal doesn't deform on impact, like human bone, every ounce of power is channeled directly into your opponent's face. With the twisting motion of the torso generating the force, and the stiff metal of the M16 providing the impact, it's enough to shatter a cheekbone or break a jaw. The combined momentum of your forward step, the twist of your torso, and the swing of the rifle, the butt stroke can strike your opponent at over 18 miles per hour, carrying well over 550 pounds of force. That's enough to drive a 16-penny nail through nearly 2 inches of pressure-treated wood. Add a follow-up slash and thrust with a bayonet, and the butt stroke becomes a real killer. But the real damage from the knee bar doesn't come from gravity. It comes from leverage. Once the knee is locked, your hips act like a fulcrum, and his leg acts like a lever, multiplying any force you apply. So even though the ligaments and tendons around the knee can sustain 1,700 newtons of force, the knee bar can load a lot more than that, enough to completely destroy the joint. Pushes his opponent at a location above the center of mass, while using his sweeping leg to create a tripping point, which is below his opponent's center of mass. Once the loss of stability has occurred, gravity does the work, and the damage. On the ground and on his back, your opponent is now vulnerable to any number of finishing strikes. Much like a nutcracker, your forearm and biceps apply pressure to your opponent's carotid arteries. Located on either side of the trachea, these two arteries are the only way to get blood to the brain. It can take less pressure than squeezing an orange to stop the flow of blood to the arteries. And with no blood flow, the brain shuts down almost instantly. Fight over.
Control of your opponent's leg, you turn his hip into a pivot point. And there are two forces being imparted about the pivot point, one by the arm above and one by the sweep below. These forces act as a couple, resulting in your opponent's rotation that slams him right to the deck. And given the speed of rotation and the force of gravity, that impact could cause permanent injury. The key to the double is to hit your opponent below his rib cage, which knocks him off his center of gravity. Wrapping your arms around his legs prevents him from regaining it. Your forward momentum, coupled with the upward thrust of your hips, gets your opponent airborne. Driving him to the mat can yield over 3,000 pounds of injury-producing force. That's like dropping a 20-pound bag of cement off a 9-foot ladder onto someone's chest.
The key to the sprawl is sliding your legs backward, while leaning in and locking your hips at the same time. This forces your opponent's center of mass beyond its stability zone. Coupled with the downward thrust of your forearms, he's now supporting your entire upper body with the back of his neck and head, which leaves him face down on the mat, vulnerable to any number of attacks.
The power of this move comes from the spin. Like the wrecking ball at the end of a demolition crane, the power is generated by the rotation of the body. In conjunction with the snap of the knee, the foot achieves a velocity of nearly 30 miles per hour. When the heel connects with the solar plexus, it transfers 1,400 pounds of force, enough to damage internal organs and fracture multiple ribs. It gets its power from the pressure exerted by your legs. The first leg imparts pressure to the carotid artery. The second leg, working in conjunction with your arms, optimizes that pressure, transforming you into a human vice grip. If your opponent doesn't tap out, he'll pass out. Much longer and permanent brain damage can ensue. Is a combination of two levers. While your legs push up on your opponent's neck, your arms apply downward pressure to his trapped wrist. The opposing forces turn the elbow into an ad hoc fulcrum point. The armbar can result in a complete destruction of the elbow's articulating structures.
The move is difficult but devastating. There's no opposing object to push against, so all the energy of the move must come from the momentum of the leap and the acceleration of the kick. The snapping motion of the lower leg functions much like a coiled spring. When unleashed, the kick reaches impact speeds of 20 miles per hour and delivers up to 400 pounds of force to the opponent's chest. The key to this synergy of speed and power is punch technique, punch location, and punch frequency. With your elbows tucked in behind your fist, the energy of each punch is maximized. And because the punch is delivered to your opponent's core along a center line, the more directly that force is transmitted to his body. The effect is similar to that of continually slamming a battering ram against a door. No matter how strong, it can only sustain so many blows before it collapses. This kick is all about speed. The further the foot travels, the greater its acceleration, and the more dangerous a weapon it becomes. Powered by the muscles of the hip flexor and the quadriceps, by the time your foot reaches your opponent's throat, it's traveling nearly 40 miles per hour. That type of speed yields over 1,000 pounds of force, enough to puncture the Adam's apple and crush your windpipe. The power of the takedown is derived from the simple mechanical advantage you hold over your opponent. By wrapping up his striking leg at the upper thigh, you've placed your opponent in what's called conditional stability. If he remains stationary, he could technically maintain his balance indefinitely. But by driving him backward and initiating a sweep of his other leg, you've added two destabilizing factors, and the loose center of gravity simply cannot hold.
By grabbing the wrist, you provide hundreds of pounds of additional leverage. This reduces your opponent's ground weight by half and allows you to more easily knock your opponent off balance. The rotation of the hips then amplifies the power of the leg sweep. Coupled with the wrist grip, you are in complete control of your opponent's body. Leaning back slightly and driving the knee up utilizes the full power of the thigh, and the foot accelerates up to 16 miles an hour in just 1/4 of a second. That's twice the acceleration speed of a Porsche. Coupled with the rotation of the hips, the kick can impart 450 pounds of force upon impact with the ribs. When executed perfectly, it's a motion similar to cracking a 2x4 with a sledgehammer.
The calf crush works because of the ankle lock. Working in conjunction with your leg, it serves as a sort of high-torque pinch point, imparting hundreds of pounds of force on the tibia and fibula. The tibia and fibula are some of the strongest bones in the human body, but creating this pinch point allows you to deliver enough force to easily break them, which leaves your opponent with two choices: tap out and admit defeat, or risk permanently losing the use of your leg.
The key to the scissors takedown can be found in the move's name. Throwing your legs around either side of your opponent, one high on the torso, the other just in the crease of the knee, provides you with a lever on either side of his body. It's literally like a piece of paper between two blades of a scissor, only instead of slicing through paper, you're using a combination of potential and kinetic energy to cut through your opponent's center of gravity. The downward force exerted on his gi pulls your opponent across his tipping point. Along with your body weight, you generate enough instability in your opponent to drive his body to the mat, like a child tossing around a rag doll. The hip throw capitalizes on the body mechanics of both you and your opponent. Thrusting your hips into your opponent's waist creates a pivot point around which his arm is the lever. With your legs between his, you've created a center of gravity significantly lower than your opponent's. This imparts maximum instability and helps you maintain control while throwing him over your hip. The throw, coupled with the downward force of gravity, generates a speed of 8 miles per hour, which can create more injury-producing impact energy than The throw, coupled with the downward force of gravity, generates a speed of 8 miles per hour, which can create more injury-producing impact energy than falling down a small flight of stairs. This move is kick speed and kick placement. Powered by the rotation of the hips and the strongest muscles in the body, the quadriceps, at the point of contact, the kick is traveling 25 miles per hour and can impart 550 pounds of force.
The wider the foot travels from the center of its axis, the more speed and power it picks up. more than enough to cause a knockout or concussion. Delivered to the neck, it can fracture the cervical vertebrae. The rotation of the torso is the basis for the strike's power. Because the torso has an effective mass far greater than the arms, its rotation can impart up to 400% more force to your target. And the last-minute rotation of the wrist can magnify that force even more. These alternating points of leverage are the basis for the move. Locking the hands high behind the shoulder blades puts you in control of your opponent's center of mass, which in turn negatively affects his conditional stability. Dropping the hands behind the lower back and driving your chin into the chest further disturbs his center of mass and makes resistance from this position nearly impossible. The application of maximum force ensures you maintain control while driving your opponent to the ground. First elbow strike can accelerate to a speed of 25 miles per hour in less than a quarter of a second. Less than a third of a second later, the initial strike is followed by another, equally devastating shot.
By employing the bony tip of the elbow, these strikes deliver a double dose of injury-producing energy and can result in a broken nose, facial fractures, or a wicked cut.
Your body into the air, you effectively become a human missile, hurling your entire body mass into your opponent's gut. The force created by the body's forward momentum is partially absorbed by your opponent, which can knock the wind out of him or even crack a rib.
But the coup de grace is the elbow chop. Impacting with the head at nearly 15 miles per hour, a solidly landed elbow to the head's frontal bone can knock your opponent out, fracture his skull, or cause serious spinal cord damage.
The move works by using your opponent's own body weight against him. The first strike can land at speeds greater than 20 miles per hour and can stun your opponent with the same injury-producing energy as dropping a bowling ball from over 11 feet onto his torso.
By using his arm as a lever in conjunction with the leg sweep, you drive your opponent to the ground. Once he is on the ground, you follow up with a devastating strike to his face.
The secret to the move is wrist control. By rotating your opponent's wrist to the maximum extent of its range of motion, the bones of the wrist lock against the bones of the forearm and make it impossible to bring the strong muscles of the upper arm to bear.
Then, you can pull your opponent off balance and into a potent knee strike. The combined force of the knee strike and your opponent's forward momentum can be as much as 2,000 pounds, enough to dent sheet metal.
The effectiveness of the Pola Kaimau lies not in raw power, but in speed. By relying on your triceps to snap the strikes forward over the elbow, 3 blows can hit in 7/10 of a second. The final impact of the strike to your opponent's face can deliver as much as 175 watts of power, more than enough power to stun him or crush the cartilage of his nose. You then add insult to injury, firing one last shot into one of the most sensitive regions of the body, the groin. Pulling off the move relies on 2 factors. The first is to combine the block and the strike into a single action. This reduces the time your opponent has to respond to just 1/10 of a second.
But the real focus is to aim your strike at the throat. Because as little as 76 pounds of force can collapse the larynx, the strike doesn't need to deliver a lot of force to be deadly. One blow like this and the fight is over.
The hyperextension of the elbow, created by pulling back on the locked arm, virtually ensures that he will be taken down.
The knee strike to the wrist dislodges the knife and further loads the elbow and shoulder. The technique can easily result in damage to the elbow joint, the tendons of the rotator cuff, or even a broken arm. The key to this move is turning your opponent's lower arm into a lever. By grabbing his arm during the initial attack, you set up the lever such that direct loading to his elbow joint is achieved. Once the elbow is locked and loaded, you can pull a much heavier opponent off balance by simply lowering your center of weight.
With practice, the ninja can hit his intended target from distances as great as 45 feet. At impact, that's more powerful than a Major League Baseball
This move is more about timing and precision than power. Instead of hacking through the limb, the first strike imparts an injury just a few inches below the elbow. The sword's razor-sharp blade easily slices through the soft tissue of the attacker's arm. This opens up his defense and provides the ninja a clean opportunity to deliver the kill stroke, a powerful shot to the top of his head.
The tornado kick is a study in controlled chaos. A quick spin confuses your opponent. Then one knee is thrust into the air, launching your entire body high enough to fire a powerful kick. The momentum generated by your body weight rotating freely, combined with a powerful hip thrust, creates a devastating blow of over 700 pounds of force upon impact. More than enough to permanently damage the hyaline cartilage that protects the larynx and spinal cord. What makes this combo so effective is the momentum behind it. Powered by the running start and the most powerful muscles in the body, the quadriceps, the initial kick lands at 15 miles per hour. The second kick creates 3 times the injury-producing energy as the first, delivering over 650 pounds of force. That's like taking a shot from a sledgehammer to the face. More than enough to score a knockout and rearrange some facial features.
The axe kick draws its power differently than most kicks. Once your foot reaches the apex above your opponent's head, your body's momentum, combined with the ease of downward acceleration due to gravity, can reach speeds over 20 miles per hour. That's enough to generate more than 550 pounds of force at the point of impact, easily breaking the nose or shattering the clavicle. The power of this move comes from the spin. The rotation of the torso, combined with the foot at the extremity of that rotation, generates speeds of over 20 miles per hour. By the time the heel connects with the solar plexus, it is traveling 60 miles per hour and transfers over 450 pounds of force, enough to break ribs and even damage internal organs.